Good morning on this Sunday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, and welcome to a very special Georgia Gang. We'll have our top political stories of the year, including the 2020 election interference case, which led to the indictments of former President Donald Trump and 18 others. Also, the fight over the Atlanta police training facility, and we'll take a look ahead at the 2024 legislative session. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Another unprecedented political year in Georgia. Let's begin in Fulton County, where former President Donald Trump could go to trial this year. He's charged with 13 felonies, including racketeering. 18 others were charged for being part of the alleged criminal enterprise. We've already seen some of these folks take plea deals on much lesser charges. Melita, the former president is also facing charges in Florida, D.C., and New York, but he's still doing well in the polls.
It is astonishing, but then one does have to question polling methodologies at times, and even Phil has done that on this show before. But I think as these trials begin and as the evidence continues to mount, more and more people are beginning to see that the former president is a real threat to democracy.
Well, let's talk about that, Phil, because in some of the polling also shows that if the president is convicted on any of these charges, he loses the independence. Does that worry Republicans?
You know, it isn't over until it's over, so we all know that politically. The polling does show, whether it's good polls, bad polls, in between polls, they do show that Trump is going to probably be the presumptive Republican nominee in November. And so to answer your question, the center, according to this polling and according to even on the street interviews, has gone over to the right. And for various reasons, we could go into the out of control border, which is an outrage and a national security concern. We've got inflation. We have got all sorts of problems, including the lack of energy independence. So Biden's numbers, if you want to talk about polling, everybody agrees Biden is either in the 30s or 40s. Now you can take your pick, but that isn't good for an incumbent president. So I think right now the country does not go in the right direction, according to 70% of the American people, according to a variety of polls. So I think President Trump is in good shape, and I think to finish up, this is typical persecution, whether it's in Fulton County or any of these other venues. There's no reason why the leader of the opposition party running for president should be persecuted in this fashion, especially by some, district attorney in a locality.
Theron, what do you anticipate will happen in Fulton County when this goes to trial, if this goes to trial?
Well, that's two different scenarios. I mean, first, if it goes to trial, then it's like, what would the prosecution say? And then there's been some talks here recently of whether or not Fani Willis, our district attorney, will actually maybe prosecute the former president. If it doesn't go to trial and it just lingers on, I still think the damage has already been done. I mean, I think the American people, while they do accept this behavior that is sometimes unhinged by this former president, I do think that the polling does show that, hey, they do not want a president that is either convicted or on the verge of being convicted. But I think that, look, you got to go back to what Fani Willis has done. We had 19 defendants we've talked about on the show. We all sort of anticipated that once the pressure got on them, some of them were going to take plea deals. I'll be interested to see at the top of the year about new evidence, as we've seen come out in other states, how she basically turned some of these witnesses to provide maybe, I think, gut-wrenching evidence against the former president. I
mean, Janelle, if you think back a year ago, we were sitting here on another show, right, thinking that, we would have a former president indicted in all of these 91 counts, felony counts. Would you ever have anticipated that?
You know what? No, I didn't. And I look back at some of our notes from over the year, and what I noticed is that we talked about President Trump for probably about a month in each quarter. And so at our house, we call him the chief marketing officer, because that's what he is. I feel like that's what he is on the Republican side. I think, to your point about the independents, I think that if Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, because I think those are the top two right now, if they focused in on the independents and got independents to vote in our primary, I think you might see a little bit of a shakeup. However, do I think that that's going to be the case? I don't. I think that President Trump has a big enough lead where he'll probably, carry this through. But I must say that one of the things that surprised me is that we're still talking about this at the end of the year. That kind of speaks to Fani Willis a little bit. I didn't know there was going to be plea deals. I didn't know any of that. I kind of thought that this was going to be the big story and then move on to something else. But the fact that we're still talking about it shows a lot. But the fact that President Trump is strategically somehow dominating the airways and every quarter, I think is also something that's to be talked about.
Well, Phil, can we see a scenario, Janelle mentioned Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley, can we see a scenario where one of them could become the nominee and not Donald Trump?
I don't think so. I think that people are very angry. I think that things will be over by February or March. We have, of course, our presidential primary in Georgia in March. And I think the fact that, just to take the Fani Willis case here in Fulton County, none of those plea deals involved racketeering at all. She's misused the racketeering laws of this state. Even prominent Democrat trial attorneys in Georgia and nationally have said it's wrong. Fani has a weak case. And so I think that Trump has effectively said, they're coming after me first, they're going to come after you. And he's talking to 75+ million people who've voted for him and who continually are insulted every week by President Biden, calling them MAGA extremists, fascists, et cetera, et cetera. 75+ million Americans aren't these names, and it's an outrage to hear this. So the right is fighting back, and the center, as I say, the centrists don't like what's going on in this country direction-wise. You've got an increasingly senile president that's running against Trump. That's why Trump's doing well in the polls, too.
Well,
Melita.
You also have the former president quoting Hitler and using
He's
the
not
language.
quoting Hitler. That's ridiculous.
He's quoting Hitler and using the language of fascist. And he's using the language that was used in Germany in the run-up to World War II. He may deny that he ever read Mein Kampf, but that book was reportedly by his bedside for years.
No, that's crazy talk. There's no proof of that.
The one thing, let's take our, Laura, I think what you want us to do is let's kind of predict what next year's campaign is going to look like. All right. So I think both presidential campaigns right now are not at 75 million. I'll even say that I know that there's still not 75 million people who today will vote for Donald Trump. And I do think that the majority of people will vote for Joe Biden, but he's not even at 75, plus million either.
I think judging from the polls, there's going to be a lot of people sitting this one out.
So that's where I'm going. So the challenge that both parties have is to increase the enthusiasm amongst their base. But then to Melita's point, I think you made this point, we all know that elections are won in the middle. It's one with independents, it's one with a lot of people. And I think that's where the discipline from the Biden campaign of really sort of making sure that letting Donald Trump sort of do things to himself. He's had a lot of unforced errors, a lot of self-inflicted wounds. But I do think that when these two gentlemen, if it's them, because look, I'll say this for the Republicans, don't count Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis out. We know that in this day and age, 24-hour media cycles, there can be one video, well, maybe not even video, because we had the former president saying bad things about women on tape. He talked bad about countries, and so the question is, if they're not able to overcome Trump, then is one of them in a position to be a VP candidate? And I think Nikki Haley, to me, from what I'm hearing from a lot of Republicans, has sort of softened the Republican Party to some of her sort of moderate, not so extreme right stances.
I'm going to move on, but the question is, would she actually serve as a VP under Donald Trump? We'll see. All right, another big story that we discussed here on the Georgia Gang, the passing of former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. Melita, we talked about how beautiful all of the services were, but I love how the world got to know her legacy of helping those who live with mental illness, of helping caregivers. It's just beautiful all around. And of course, the service that she planned at Emory University was just incredible.
It was a very lovely service, and it featured family, and it featured her legacy in a beautiful way. And I'm really pleased that even in her passing, she continued to champion mental illness and caregiving.
And Janelle, I love to come to you because as somebody of the younger generations that maybe don't remember when the Carter served.
No,
but
I was born.
Just your thoughts. Yeah.
I know, I was born in '84. So.
Yeah.
But that being said, I read a book by Nancy Reagan that talked about first ladies, and she talked about how we have to take the heat and we want our husbands' legacies to live on. And a lot of people, disliked Nancy Reagan, but they loved Ronald McDonald. And I feel like when I look at Rosa Lynn, I feel that same energy. I feel like she is one of those first ladies that was able to look at the blind spots on for her husband and provide that cover. And obviously, you know, it soared him to great heights. So yeah, I actually like the love story. I don't remember the service as much. I heard of some of the policies, but but from the marriage perspective, that dynamic, I love looking at them.
You know, I did a column on Jimmy Carter as being one of the most proud, you know, sons of Georgia nationally and world. But then you can't have a Jimmy Carter without, you know, his right hand, the partnership that they shared with marriage. I made their marriage a winner on this show, and because of just the love. And then, you know, there was a brief moment in Georgia and Atlanta when we saw all these first ladies and two, Bill Clinton and Joe Biden was there.
Their lovely husbands.
Their lovely husbands, correct. I knew you remember that line. Where really the city and the state was united. And then, you know, boom, days later we go back to our corners. But it just speaks to the Carter legacy and how they really tried to make people love one another.
Phil, you want to say something real
Well,
quick?
I will agree with that, and I just think he was a far better former president than the president, even though it was a great partnership.
We'll leave it there. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, go out to the family of Rosalind Carter, who are without their matriarch this holiday season. Well, up next, a year of protests, petition drives, court cases, and violence over the Atlanta Police Training Facility. We'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Atlanta's new police and fire training facility made national news as violence erupted at the site in January, which led to the shooting death of one of the protesters. Despite all of the pushback, protests, petition drives, so far the training center is moving forward. Theron.
Listen, as we go into 2024, what we saw was sort of a snapshot in this past special session where I think both parties are going to have a message, not just on public safety, but particularly Republicans putting people in a position to say, hey, either you're for or against this new public training center, right? Public safety training center. What I think that's got to happen, though, is that we got to wait and see if the actual ballot will be on, you know, opportunity for them to vote. You know, we talked about on the show that there's been some reports from the media that's not enough signatures are probably there. I think not rush to judgment on that because these protesters, they deserve an opportunity for those signatures to be counted and the city to be transparent. But I think that, Lori, as I sit here in 2023, I still think the protests will continue. I think the police department will continue to focus on training and communicate with the public. But ultimately, what I really hope that doesn't happen and what we saw in 23 is the violence, the threats on people's lives, the families, spouses being threatened, you know, houses, people have to get security, the harassment that's happened, the bombing, that type of stuff. I really hope that doesn't happen in 24.
Well, Phil, is there anything, or could there have been anything that the city could have done to really prevent this type of violence, to prevent the protest and addressing some of the critics' concerns?
Well, sadly, not really. Obviously, that everybody has a right to protest peacefully, but it was hijacked by radicals. And most of these are out of state, is what's happening. There's an anti-police movement that's fanned by the hard left. Now, I'm not talking about all Democrats or all liberals, and I've always praised Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens for being a big supporter of the police training facility. But no, this is going to continue. There's websites saying, come to Atlanta and be part of the resistance, kill the police, kill the pigs. It's a vicious campaign, and I'm glad we're using RICO properly in this state against this coordinated attack. Chief Darren Schierbaum rightly says that it's a nationwide network of leftists that are going after this. So there will be, this will be built, in my opinion, but we're going to have more problems.
Lito.
Well, not everyone who has protested against the training facility falls into the categories of protesters that Phil was just describing. I believe there will still be, even after the facility is built, some protest about what kinds of training they are offering, who they're offering it to, because this is a facility that will be run by the Atlanta Police Foundation. We don't even have a clear picture of how many days the facility will exclusively be used for Atlanta police officers. And also, you know, there's in some of the fine print of some of the documents, there are days that it'll be a movie site. So I think that if the city wants to avoid continuing protests, there needs to be some transparency about things like cost overruns as the facility is finished, who's paying for those, and then the continuing operations of the facility and how it's being operated.
All right, another hot political issue in 2023, sure to continue in 2024 as critics made a push for paper ballots and upgrades to the current voting machines. Janelle.
Yeah, so I made my point on this one. I think that we should, focus in on the absentee ballots, and that was a major issue, as well as I'm not necessarily a fan of the paper ballots, but I do, if I can just take a moment of privilege to speak on the Atlanta Training Center situation. I think that it's interesting that we're talking about what will happen once the building is built, when they've spent an entire year trying to prevent it from even being built. I think that was the biggest issue. I looked at my notes and I saw that we talked about that from January up until December. And so I really want to know if the goal is progress, then why hinder progress rather than supporting the training center and moving us forward. That's all.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to the paper ballots, the voting machines. Theron.
Look, 2024, Georgia is going to be front and center again. We are a first-tier battleground state. Now there's different ways of how you can look at it from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And so one of the things that we got to get right is making sure that voters feel like there's integrity with their votes, that it's secure, and that it's transparency. And we had a long debate about paper ballots, barcodes, whether they work or not. Voting machines are still coming up. We have a Secretary of State who basically is being called to testify about the 2020 election. I think at this moment, as we're talking about this, he's not said that he's going to do it. And so I think that you got to have this confluence between the Secretary of State's office and the local board of elections, and making sure they got the resources they need and the confidence from people at the state and the federal government to do their jobs effectively.
Phil.
Well, yes, we got to have that confidence, and I think that cuts across all party lines. And Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, is my loser for the year because, as you pointed out, and I pointed out last week, he was called to testify by federal judge Amy Totenberg because of cyber problems and security issues. The QR code, the judge in her ruling already has ripped Raffensperger apart. Raffensperger refuses to testify. He could take 75 minutes and explain and give us confidence. At least he could be patching something where there's apparent malware problems. But no, he's not doing that. They're appealing, and he's just coward.
Alita?
Well, and so the Judge Totenberg case that is before her is set to go to trial in early January. And so how that trial proceeds, or whether that trial is settled, will tell us a lot about how we cast ballots in Georgia in 2024. And so that's a very important case to watch. And it's very interesting that the state only began to negotiate with the other side in the case, the plaintiffs, after Raffensperger was told to testify. He doesn't want to testify, and we have to all wonder why.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Coming up, a look ahead at the 2024 legislative session. Stay tuned.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The first day of the 2024 legislative session is January 8th, just around the corner. Lots of buzz about several different issues. Let's talk about Medicaid expansion first. Phil, we're hearing there may be some give and take on this issue from Republicans after all this time.
That's right. I think the polling shows that, and it's not surprising, that everybody, again, regardless of their politics, is concerned about health care and access and Medicare availability. The problem is we had COVID, as we all know. The problem is now who's eligible in Georgia. And so some people have been taken off the rolls, rightly or wrongly, and I think a lot of them rightly so. A lot of people didn't understand the paperwork, and I blame the Biden administration. They should have told people about this. And of course, the states needed to be doing more too. So I don't know what's going to happen in the legislature, but it's going to be the cost that'll be the big issue. How much is it going to cost?
Melita, if Republicans actually embrace Medicaid expansion, what does that do for Democrats on the campaign trail? Because that is the marquee issue.
There are still many parts of the Republican agenda for the last 2 decades that are worthy of calling attention to, because this next campaign season will mean 2 decades of a trifecta of Republican control. And so there will be plenty to talk about on the campaign trail.
All right, I'm going to keep it moving. Let's talk education, because it looks like the issue of vouchers will come up again. It does have the backing of Governor Brian Kemp. The quote, Georgia Promise Scholarship Act would give $6,500 a year to the families of public school students who leave a low-performing public school. Now, parents could use the money to enroll their kids in a private school or to help them with homeschooling costs. Last year, Janelle, 16 Republicans voted against the bill on the House floor. Could they be swayed this year in any type of effort?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to sway them is to remove this from rural communities. The biggest issue was that a lot of our rural representatives found that in their communities, it's just difficult to sell this when the school system is a priority as it relates to job and employment and things of that nature, and people just get nervous about it. So I think if we just take that out and make the metro area the pilot, I think we'll be able to get them on board because they'll support that. And then on top of that, we got to message it better to the community. I don't think people understand the term vouchers. I don't think most parents even know, particularly in certain communities, I don't even think they know that they have this amount of money that can be shifted. So trying to explain that and doing that in a way where the messaging is strong, I think we can get it across the aisle.
Theron?
The Republicans are going to have a challenge getting caucus members to vote for this, and Janelle just made some good points. But on the Democratic side, you know, most Democrats, if not all of them, I would say, are huge supporters of public schools. And so does this voucher bill decrease funding from public school? Does it hurt public education in this state? And so I think the minority party, which are the Democrats, they're going to strategically look at this. And this, you know, unfortunately was in the middle of a lot of negotiations of some other bills, and then the Democratic Party locked down. But then surprisingly, you had these 16 Republicans who didn't vote for it. So as someone who is very supportive of public education and knowing that there are a lot of teachers out there that need this, you know, opportunity to teach our kids in the public arena, you know, I think it's going to be very tough to sell. And then lastly, you know, there's still this surplus out there. And one of the things that Republicans could do, if you want to try to give choice to parents, then fully fund more education opportunities within public schools. And I think then you can kind of soften your argument a little bit. But I think until we really fully fund public education and make sure that we're doing everything we can from a state level, I don't know if we can get that bill passed.
All right, well, you know we'll be discussing that in 2024. So let me just move on. I want to talk about sports betting. Now, I didn't mention casinos. I did not mention horse racing. I'm talking about sports betting. Phil, you hearing anything about could this possibly get over the line this year?
Yes, I think that could finally do it. I mean, lobbyists have been working on it, what, for 4 or 5 years now?
We say it every year on the show.
We say it every year.
Is this the year?
Yeah,
You know.
and the lobbyists are still getting their retainers, by the way. But I think that this time has come. It's a good revenue source. And I think that it always could get hung up, as we all know, on the 39th or 40th day of the legislature. But this is the best shot they've had yet.
All right. Well, some Republican Georgia senators are recommending the state abolish its requirement for permits to build health facilities. The decades-old law known as Certificate of Need requires anyone who wants to build a new health care facility or offer services to prove an expansion is needed. Melita, your thoughts on this?
Well, there were very good reasons for those laws in the beginning. But what we've seen is that you have all these gleaming towers named for philanthropists for various diseases in Atlanta. And in the rural areas of the state, you have an underserved healthcare desert. You have half the counties that don't have an OBGYN. I think almost 60 counties don't have a pediatrician. And so these certificate of need rules perhaps need to, if not be abolished, at least updated for where the system currently stands and what is needed to solve the very real issues for rural health care. Because in certain parts of rural Georgia, people drive to Florida or to Alabama or to South or North Carolina or Tennessee for their health care because they live closer to those places and the big hospitals there than in Atlanta.
All right, we're going to be lots of debate on this one. We'll be watching all of these issues very closely in 2024. Out of time in this block, so you know what's next. Winners and losers, and I understand we already have one loser of the year according to Phil, so stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Melita, we'll start with you.
Well, my winners of the year are the next generation of leaders who are emerging. They're younger, they're more diverse, but we started the year with 45 new members of the Georgia General Assembly, the largest freshman class ever. And you also are seeing new faces in courthouses and city halls all over the state. My loser of the year are the women of Georgia who've been stripped of medical autonomy for personal decisions about reproduction.
All right, Phil.
Well, I did name Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger as my loser of the year because he didn't want to testify to how secure the election system is. I think that my winner would be probably all the Republican constitutional officers that last January won their seats from the governor, and a new lieutenant governor, Burt Jones, and of course a new speaker, which really turned things around, in the Georgia House Representative John Burns. So they're all winners.
Okay, but you know Brad Raffensperger is one of them.
Yeah, I know it. There's always an aberration there.
Aaron.
I think if my winners of the year, just going to mention a few people, but we had some giants that we lost. Marvin Aronson Sr., Bill Shipp, Dr. Christine King Ferris. The leader reminded me of Carolyn Long Banks and Tommy Dortch, just to name a few people who were just winners. And another thing I think, going into 2024, I just want to thank all the poll workers and the people who work at the Capitol, City Hall, these county buildings that do all the great work that they do to make sure that these elected officials are able to serve and that we have these elections. So I definitely want to make them the winners of the year as well. No losers of the year for me this year.
Really?
No.
Turning over a new leaf, are
No
you?
leaf. I'm a happy man.
Are you okay?
I'm happy. A lot of good things happened to me this
Not
year.
even Donald Trump, huh?
No, not yet. Not yet.
All right.
Well, it's funny because I do have a loser, but I'm going to save that one for last. So I'll go with my winner first. My winners are all the Georgians that survived the holidays, that were able to get through this year, even though the economy was just beating them down. I really do give a shout out to all the Georgians that made it through. You made it. This is the end of the year. Next year will be better because the Republicans will win. And my loser is President Joe Biden for just, and just putting us all in this situation. We're just tired of it. So go out, be safe tonight, have fun, and thank y'all for this year.
And Happy New Year. See you next week. See you next year.